Welcome back to the Inside Nebraska Recruiting Blitz podcast. As always, I'm Tim Verghese. Got a rundown on some of the biggest recruiting news over the last week. Kind of a quiet week. Outside of obviously the big news, Sunday Nebraska flipped four-star offensive tackle Julian Juju Marks from Kansas. Marks hails from Olathe South down in Kansas, right outside of Kansas City. Basically part of that greater Kansas City area. Um, pretty impressive land for Nebraska, just in my opinion. He was a guy that committed to Kansas over the summer. Had a big offseason this past offseason, picking up some big offers. Had Alabama enter the mix, had Georgia enter the mix, Penn State, Oregon, all these other like top national programs that entered the mix for him. He ultimately decided he wanted to stay closer to home and committed to Kansas over the summer. And actually, before he committed, he had a top eight that didn't include Nebraska. He had some regional schools involved. He was looking to stay closer to home, but even though Nebraska was one of the first programs to offer him, Nebraska really just was never able to gain any real ground in that recruitment, and that changed this summer when Jamar Mosey joined the staff. Mosey, of course, former head coach at Lee Summit North, also in the greater Kansas City area. Spent the spring at UCF as a recruiting assistant down there, a football assistant down there, and was recruiting Marks to UCF. Then came to Nebraska. Started recruiting Marks, had Donovan Raiola helping him, had Matt Rule helping him, had a few others working. And ultimately Nebraska was able to flip Marks. And I know this decision caught some people off guard over inside Nebraska. We've had coverage on Marks over the last few weeks. Just hinting that he might be looking around and there was a chance Nebraska um was going to have a chance here. Greg Smith, our own Greg Smith, was all over it. And yeah, this weekend it kind of came to fruition. He kind of sat down, did some thinking, and ultimately saw the developmental opportunity at Nebraska and NIL opportunity at Nebraska compared to Kansas, and decided to flip his commitment. As for what he brings to Nebraska and what he's going to be, he's a 6'6" offensive lineman, weighing right around 275, 285 pounds right now. Plenty of room to continue filling out into his frame. Has a lengthy wingspan, verified 6'6" with a 6'10" wingspan, so a plus wingspan, which you really like to see at the offensive tackle position. You can see the pop up in film. You see his large hands as well on film. I think he just uses his size to keep defenders at bay. A guy that can play both sides of the ball. He technically started his athletic career as a basketball prospect, and was always basketball focused as a young prospect. And getting into high school, he was focused when he started football, was mainly focused on the defensive side of the ball. Started his career at St. Thomas Aquinas in Kansas. Ended up transferring to Olathe South as a senior. But early in his career at St. Thomas Aquinas, he was a defensive lineman primarily. Made the transition as a junior to the offensive side of the ball. Did both the last year. Is primarily focused on the offensive side of the ball this year. And you can see it start to come together for him. You saw the flashes last year. You're really starting to see it come together for him this year at Olathe South. Um, a really smooth mover, a guy that you can tell he's got a basketball background. You can tell he's a multi-sport athlete. You can see the athleticism just in the way he moves around at that size. He's got a very large base. And for that, he's quite nimble on his feet, moves in space really well, would be an excellent puller, and moving laterally. He does a good job of that in pass pro. Just a very sound mover. You can see the body strength, just, going up against high school defensive linemen. You can kind of see the body strength. You can see just the general athleticism. Um, I think if you're looking at concerns here, this is a guy that has you watch his career and you watch games. If you're really looking for a concern, it really is just the motor and the explosiveness. It's motor is something that you can always work on and something you can improve upon, and Nebraska's going to work with him on that because you can kind of see throughout the course of a game, just and it's understandable at the size, but his game does start to taper off throughout a game, and that's something that can get fixed, can with better conditioning, being in a college, strength program, being in a program where you can kind of develop athleticism and develop what's the word I'm looking for? Develop conditioning. Nebraska can definitely improve that with him. The other issue, and even that it's a minor thing, I think right at this point is just again consistent explosiveness and pad level. Out of his stance. And that's just improving consistency more than anything. And that'll come with time, and with the addition, I think talking bigger picture now, with the addition, Nebraska now has 4 offensive line commits in the 2025 class. Three technically offensive tackle in Brian Tapu, Sean Hammerbeck, and now Juju Marks. All three are guys that are somewhat projects. I think if you're looking at all three, I think have pretty high ceilings if they can put it together. But the floor is somewhat dependent. I think if you look at Tapu in the senior year he's having, you really like the upside there, and kind of I think he comes in with a better floor than some people expect. But he's going to need a year or two to just keep developing and add weight to his frame. Same with Hammerbeck. I think more than anything with Hammerbeck, it's time in the weight room and time to work on technique, just relative to the competition he plays in South Dakota. But you look at Marks, I think there's a legitimate high ceiling there, and there's a higher floor than the other two. But it's still, I think it's going to be one of those situations where he might need a year or two even to see the field, just to continue adding weight, improve on those things I mentioned, just improving conditioning, the way he's built, just kind of the proportions, managing, kind of where his weight is distributed. And I think those things are a bit of a work in progress. So you like the floor of this class, you like the depth they're building in the O-line room so far in this class, but I think you're looking through down the stretch of this cycle. I don't know if they go and get another high school offensive lineman. I don't think they have necessarily. They aren't. I don't think there's a recruitment out there they can swing in and win, because at this point, if you're looking for a high school offensive lineman, you're looking for someone that can be somewhat of an instant impact guy. And unless it's something like flipping a David Sanders or flipping, one of the guys from Bishop Gorman, I don't think that's happening for Nebraska this year. And speaking of, I mean, those situations with David Sanders and the Bishop Gorman guys, I just don't see that happening at this point with Nebraska, just with where the season's at, where those guys are with their respective schools. I think those guys are staying put where they're at. Or if they are flipping, I don't think it's going to be to Nebraska. That being said, I think Nebraska is going to remain in pursuit of 1-2 offensive linemen, guys that can either make an instant impact, or guys that can provide some quality depth going into next season. I think you're going to try and find that through the transfer portal. Nebraska is going to be aggressive, I predict, in the transfer portal, we're looking for prospects in general, but specifically in the trenches on both sides of the line, with having to replace the guys they have to replace. I think you're going to see a real effort from Nebraska to bolster both sides of the line. Kind of to close the show, just wanted to also discuss. We spent Friday night. We were originally set to go to St. Louis to go see Nebraska four-star running back commit Jamarian Parker and his Cardinal Ritter team take on DeSmet out in St. Louis. DeSmet is home to four-star defensive line, 2026 four-star defensive line target Titan Davis. And had that marked in the calendar for a bit, and was excited to get out there. And then Thursday night, realized that our own aforementioned Greg Smith was actually at that game, or headed to that game as well. So called an audible and cut my road trip in half and went to Kansas City instead, and spent the evening out in Blue Valley to go see four-star linebacker Dawson Merritt. Nebraska is, of course, trying to flip Merritt away from Alabama. An entertaining game, first off foremost. Blue Valley lost 35-34. It was an exciting game. As those of you who followed on social media or saw on social media, it was a game that featured the children of two Kansas City Chiefs assistant coaches. Tate Nagy, son of offensive coordinator Matt Nagy, was a quarterback for Blue Valley West, and Dawson Merritt, the son of Chiefs defensive backs coach Dave Merritt. So the Chiefs were in attendance. Andy Reid, Patrick Mahomes, Chris Jones. The whole group was in town, or in attendance to watch this rivalry. And Nagy now has some bragging rights on Merritt. Kind of coming out of that win. As for Dawson Merritt and what we saw from him, he had double-digit tackles, multiple tackles for loss, had 2 sacks, I believe, on the day. Just made his impact felt. I think he's really coming into his own as like a well-rounded linebacker, can kind of do a lot of different things. I think long term. I think he's best as a linebacker in space. Just because he's got some very natural talent and quickness as a pass rusher, and you like what you see from him in pursuit as well. But I think just that athleticism and the long term how big he can get. I think at this point, I think he's gonna have to stick in at linebacker somewhere in space, where we can cover, where he can fit the run, and from time to time get to blitz the quarterback. And Alabama has that role set for him, but so does Nebraska. Talking to him, I think he was really just it meant a lot to him that Matt Rule spent his bye week in Blue Valley to go see him last week. That meant a lot. Rule and linebackers coach Rob Dvorak and other guys on the staff have been in pretty much consistent communication. Nebraska and Alabama are the only two schools really still in this recruitment. If anyone's going to flip him away from Alabama, it's going to be Nebraska, or he's just going to stick with his commitment to Alabama. But he's really evaluating his options. I've said it a couple of places now, but I think this is becoming a true 50-50 recruitment again. Obviously, when I talked to him, that was before Nebraska's loss to Indiana. And texting with him a little bit after. I don't think it means as much as people think it means. At the end of the day, on that same day, he's spending his Saturdays watching a lot of football, watching Nebraska, watching Alabama, seeing where he fits in best. And on one hand, yes, he saw Nebraska lose in a pretty embarrassing fashion, but then later that day, watched Alabama lose as well to a Tennessee team that had some ups and downs a bit, but that was a more competitive loss, of course. At the end of the day, it's not a good reflection. Regardless, what Nebraska did on Saturday is not a good reflection to any recruit. But it wasn't a good reflection to Merritt. So Nebraska will, for that recruitment and for a bunch of other recruitments and for members of the current team too, Nebraska has to, I think, need to finish strong, at least make a bowl game, hopefully win, try and win 2, 3 more games down the stretch of the season to try and instill some hope in the long term rebuild in the long term outlook for this program. Again, I say all that to say I do think Nebraska has a real chance at flipping Merritt. It's going to be something that they're going to have to keep chipping away at. Stay patient with. I think there's some consistent communication there. But it's helping. I'm landing Marks on Sunday night. That's another Kansas City area guy that Merritt's familiar with. Landing Isaiah Mosey a couple months ago. That's another Kansas City area guy that Merritt's familiar with. Obviously, Jamar Mosey's kind of working in that Merritt recruitment as well. So there's a couple people and a couple ties now that are working on flipping Dawson Merritt. But that's a recruitment that I do believe is going to be one to keep an eye on and one that Nebraska has a real shot at. Be sure to check out my story over at Inside Nebraska on Merritt. We've got quotes from him. So if you don't believe it from me, believe kind of what he's saying. That'll about probably do it for us here today. A quick episode. Just wanted to touch on these big 3 things. I know there's not a whole lot else to talk about, just because outside of landing a commitment on Sunday and the consistent pursuit of Dawson Merritt. Nothing really to write home about after Saturday's loss. I think right now Nebraska is just kind of licking their wounds a little bit, trying to reset and try and gain some momentum down the backstretch of the season, somehow, some way, to try and finish this 2025 class out strong, get some momentum going for the upcoming transfer portal class, and moving on into the spring, and from there start to build this 2026 class. So stay tuned to Inside Nebraska for the rest of our content this week, recruiting and otherwise. We'll have a Tim Beats piece as always up later this week. We'll have a mailbag up on Wednesday. So stay tuned for all of that, and we will catch you all next week.